Welcome. We're glad to have you joining us for this next episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
Back together again. You traveled, I got over my sickness, and I'm very pleased that we can be sitting side by side to have some curious conversation today.
And fortunate in these days of flight delays and maintenance and staffing issues, et cetera, and we had some severe delays yesterday, but made it.
Good. Well, I'm very pleased that you're home safely and glad to get into today's topic, which is assumptions. So I'm going to try to say this in a totally clean version, but my husband has often said to me, kind of tongue-in-cheek, you know what happens when you assume. You've heard this? So if you think about the spelling of assume, the first three letters are, have a...
Donkey?
Yeah, correct. If you assume, you make a donkey out of you and me, right. the spelling of assume. And it's true. Assumptions that we make about others can be so far from the truth, can lead towards some really harmful interactions. Conversely, people can have some really wrong assumptions about us, puts us into a tailspin. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about assumptions and some of the things that we might be able to do with some proactive questioning around why it is that our minds go there.
Well, and we've talked a little bit about parts of this before. And there was a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. And the whole premise of the book is that our brains are wired to process things and categorize things really quickly, mainly because we get 976 bits of information per hour these days. And if we didn't have some way to categorize and pigeonhole and all that stuff, then our brains would go nuts. We seriously couldn't survive. And his whole premise is that many times your intuition can be trusted because it takes in data without judgment, which is a good thing, right? And it just kind of says, here's what's going on. Then we kind of take the time to process.
Yeah.
But sometimes that blink, that first set of intuition is a good thing. Now, again, caveat is you always have to look for new data and different data, and sometimes the what you first see is not what it should be at all. And I'm reminded of those commercials where they were doing a point about not making it's not what it might appear at first, and this lady's getting up to go to the bathroom and steps across this guy in the seat, and there's turbulence and the lights go off, and by the time the lights come back on, she's straddling him with her shirt ripped and the whole bit, and it looks really bad.
Yeah.
That's not what's going on, right? And so you do have to be prepared to say, okay, that's probably not what's going on, and let's give the benefit of the doubt here, etc. But Malcolm Gladwell would say that your intuition is mostly right most of the time, and you should trust it. But those assumptions can get you in really bad situations, especially relationship-wise and situational-wise, as you said. So, how do you stay curious when you've made an assumption? How do you know that an assumption is right or wrong?
This is a conversation I feel like I could have for half of a day, and we certainly won't go that long, but I feel like it's really complex. And I know that this is something that I struggle with tremendously. Maybe not the assumption part, but skewing into dark thinking. And I know those things are not inherently the same, but I think they have some crossovers. And so I'm interested in this Gladwell analogy or instruction rather about you can trust your intuition much of the time, but then how do we know when intuition diverges from assumption? And then how do we get to the point of asking some curious questions when assumptions verge from just a really negative, pessimistic frame of mind?
Well, it's been a couple of years since I read Malcolm Gladwell and many brain cells ago. So I want to be careful with the assumptions I make about what his points were. I would just make the statement from my own experience that the blink works more with an expert who's looking at a sculpture, if it's real or if it's authentic or a copy. And in other words, things more than people, because people are so wildly different and change from minute to minute. day to day, etc. So I think the blink thing is more along those lines. But with people, we have to be very careful because what you initially see, you can't judge a book by its cover.
Right.
And there's legions of stories about that, and Hollywood tells us, don't judge a book by its cover. And we want to make sure that we don't profile, we don't make assumptions based on someone's appearance about everything. Personally, I've noticed that there are some people who like me or don't like me, and I sometimes will get a little put off by someone who just assumes the wrong thing about me in a situation versus the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've actually told people, hey, can't you give me the benefit of the doubt and just assume that I'm telling the truth, or that the situation is thus and not they, and or so. And so in my own personal life, I think we tend to give some people the benefit of the doubt and some people not the benefit of the doubt. So assumptions probably go along those lines.
Yeah, I would imagine. This topic has been very up close and personal for me. I had a situation unfold, and I'll be cautious not to overshare in this just because of this is a public forum and I'm not going to, disclose too much information. But someone has made an assumption about me that is very wrong, about my motives, about my desire to lead something. And the response that I got was so hurtful and so, I would say, almost slanderous against my character. And I found myself wanting to retaliate. And I'm not one to pick a fight. And so when I say retaliate, it's mental, not actual. But about, well, you don't know this, that, and the other thing about me, and how dare you assume, and blah, 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 blah. I got real bent out of shape, and then I think my assumption meter ramped up about why the response was what it was, and it can very quickly turn into a nasty situation when you assume someone else's motives.
And I love the old adage, we judge ourselves by our motives and others by their actions. Sometimes our motives don't line up with our actions, and sometimes the other person's perception of our motives not matching our actions are that way. I know, and I think we've talked about this before, I come across as very outgoing, and I will passionately put something out there to get an argument sometimes. That is seen by some people as intimidating. That is seen by some people as I just want what I want, or I say something and that's the end of the discussion. Not meant to be that way at all. And so, and lots of times I think that I get a sense from someone that they're assuming, or not a sense, maybe even direct data, that they're assuming my motivations are something when they're really something else. And we do get defensive about that, and we want to defend ourselves, which sometimes makes it worse.
I would say much of the time makes it worse. Well, so in this case, I can't go back and undo my initial hurt feelings, or I can't undo a lot of the things that I thought. But for the future, I'm trying to arm myself with some curious questions that if something like this were to happen again, somebody makes an assumption about an action that I've taken, or makes an assumption about my motivation that is contrary to the truth, how do I arm myself with those questions to lead me through the next communications so that it doesn't become this volatile, ugly situation?
I've always been envious of people in those situations who are able to just remain calm and make a very objective statement or question, such as, well, that statement would seem to say that my motivation in this situation is this. Is that your assumption? And just kind of put it out there.
Yeah.
And let them respond. Well, yeah, I think your motivation is this. It's like, that's interesting because my motivation is not that, it's this. And I'm sorry if I've come across this way, or that my actions belie that motivation. Maybe we can readdress this situation and figure out another path here. Or what about my action makes you believe that this is my motivation versus this? And you know, who knows where that conversation leads? But I think that at some level in society, if someone says, no, 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 this is my motivation, unless you have direct data, otherwise, you kind of have to take them at their word.
Right.
If you don't, well, then that sets up a whole spider web of issues, right?
Well, and I know that we've touched on this before, but because of this digital age that we live in, it's very easy for us to pop off a response, a criticism, a condemnation, without really thinking about the person on the other side, because it's electronic. You've typed it, you've texted it, you've shot it through a instant message, whatever the case may be, and we just no longer associate a face when we're having those types of quick reactions. And so because of that, I think we maybe are more harsh, we feel like we have more margin to speak into someone else's life than maybe we really do. It was just interesting that I went through this situation the same time a very good friend received a pretty harsh message from someone who hardly knows him, really condemning some of the ways that he had posted something online. And, you know, my friend says, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know my situation. He doesn't know anything about my circumstance. And how dare he come at me in this way? And we talked about it at length. I'm really pleased to say, though, that today I had a follow-up conversation with my friend. He paused. He did not respond in anger, really took some time to think through it. He did say, you know, I felt really judged by this statement. You don't really know me, my lifestyle, my situation. You don't understand what it is that I do. And so this came across in a really hard way to me. And the response back was, I'm so sorry, that was not my intent. I just was trying to be cognizant of other people who might be watching this and misinterpreting. And this potentially could lead towards a developing relationship or friendship. And I sincerely hope it does. But I think we have to take the time to step back and respond when we're not hot-headed, and to not respond in kind if we feel like we're being attacked.
So in a world where everything is done in 24 to 48 characters, I think this is a big issue, because whenever we say something, I think we have to make the assumption that it's going to be taken out of context to some degree, whether that's 1%, 10%, or 100%. And so I think we do bear some responsibility that if we do not provide context along with our statement or our questions, they can be and may well be taken out of context and construed in a totally different way than intended. And, you know, and so what can be our approach in the future for that?
Yeah. I have found myself on more than one occasion, if I have to respond to somebody in email, I think it was you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've said that email is the lowest form of communication.
That's the worst form. Well, other than text. I mean, it starts with, you know, Twitter and then text and then, you know, emails. I spend probably way too much, some would argue, time crafting emails just because, you know, it's a potential, you know, written record of what you're trying to communicate and what the message is. So I always try to come across and I often go back and re-edit to make sure people aren't thinking that I'm just being efficient with my words, but my meaning gets so lost that it's almost opposite of what I intend, you know, just like we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, so what I found myself doing, it was certain emails that I know that have the potential to be misunderstood or misinterpreted, is to say, I know you cannot read my tone of voice, but this is my heart.
Right.
And just to verbatim say that, because I want the recipient to know, hey, you may be reading this with a negative voice in your head, but that is not my intention.
You know, and I could do a lot better at this, but sometimes when I read something, first of all, I have the context of my relationship with the person. That's always behind something that I read. I love it in the Bible when they start off a letter to someone saying, you know, Paul, XXXXS, right? At the start. I'm always looking to, at the end, as to who the signature is, if it's a physical letter, or the address return label if there is one. Now we have the benefit in email of knowing who sent it.
Right.
But I always take that context as I'm reading something, and that's going to be my first level of context. My second level is going to be, tone and how much they're doing and things like that. But I mean, sometimes I might really care about a person, but they'll send me some long paragraph, very well set up. I can tell they spent a lot of time on it. And I just send back a one sentence response.
Or thumbs up.
or a thumbs up, or the worst one, K.
Yeah.
Right? And that's almost like fine, right? It has so many different meanings, and it doesn't do justice. So when I do that, I sometimes go back and say, so how you doing? How's the family? You doing okay? How was your last trip? Whatever. I add that stuff in. It's not my nature, not that I don't care about the person, it's that I want them to know that I care about them. And I think that's the issue we have in this day of digital communication is there isn't context, there isn't body language, there isn't those things that we know. I love the old Far Side cartoon where somebody's talking to their dog, Ginger. And it says, Ginger, you can't go in the trash. It really messes things up, and I hate coming home from work and finding you in the trash, and you're spreading it all over, and it's causing all kinds of problems. And then that's what you're saying, and then it shows a panel of what the dog hears. Ginger, blah 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 blah. Ginger, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then they look for the tone.
Yeah.
And you say Ginger or you say Ginger. The dog is very much into body language.
Yep.
That's all they know because they don't understand the language. And I feel like sometimes I need to be more like a dog and try to perceive the body language, and even in an email and a text, tease out the real motivation. Now, I don't like conflict, so I will generally generally do think of the best part of it because I don't want to know if it's the worst definition. But sometimes it would behoove me to write back and say, are you saying this? And I think that's a valid thing to do at any time.
Or to say, hey, could we follow up with a phone call? I think maybe this was misunderstood. I can think of a very simple example of how someone can write something and somebody else can receive it based on a tone that they have in their own head. So if I was house sitting for you, and maybe you'd been gone for a long time, and I send you a text, and I've gone through a bunch of supplies while you're gone, and so my last sentence to you in a text is, "You must go shopping." In other words, you're gonna need to go get stuff before you come home because we've run out of stuff, right? But you can read that in a couple different ways depending on where you put the emphasis on the different words.
Right.
You must go shopping. You must go shopping. You must go shopping.
Right.
You must go shopping.
Right.
And I'm saying that in a very exaggerative way, but depending on the mood of the moment that you're in, you have the potential to read that in 4 different ways.
That's right. Or more.
Or more.
Depending on your mood and the mood of the person who wrote it. And
Yeah.
that's the other issue here, especially with human beings, is, are you catching me at a good time, a bad time? Am I frustrated with the world? Am I on top of the world?
Yeah.
Do I care? Because you're right. I might read the same sentence on 2 different days as it's my responsibility to keep my house stocked with stuff, even though you're the one living in it and consuming it. Or I might think, oh, hey, thanks for the heads up. I probably need to stop and get this and this and this. It's important in my daily life before I come back to the house. I can see that as 2 totally different things, as you said.
Yeah. So assumptions are killers, potentially. I think all of us have been in a situation where someone's assumption about us or conversely has gone wrong, and we've had to make some corrections to get the relationship back on track. But really being armed with some of those questions and being armed with the follow-up, I think, is the other key to this. And as you mentioned, I think you're hearing this. Is that the case? Or I'm interpreting it so in this way, is that accurate? To be willing to take that next step further, because again, if we just sit on those assumptions, we can stew on that, and it causes a lot of rot, I think, in how we perceive somebody else.
And then the proactive step, yes, and to all that, I think we should be better at asking questions to clarifying questions is the best way to deal with assumptions. And then the proactive approach is to work on those relationships, especially the ones you're going to have long term.
Yeah.
The longer term, the more you should do this, is to build up that emotional bank account. Build up, be aware of my own tendencies, be aware of which tendencies rub that other person right and wrong, and then understand that as I'm communicating in all my communications with that in mind. If this person thinks I'm an intimidating, overpowering jerk who always think that I'm right, that should, if I know that that's the case and I can perceive it, then I should approach my communication a little bit differently than someone who knows my heart and knows that I'm just trying to add value to the conversation and to the other person. I'm for you, and that then if we can work on those relationships in such a way, well, then they're going to make the right assumption. They're going to take it in a context of this person's for me. They're trying to add value to my life, and this is somebody who I generally love and respect. That if we can get to a place like that in our long-term relationships, communications become so much easier, regardless of how poor the communication mechanism.
Well, and I think we've touched on this in so many episodes that you really have to be intentional about building that relationship so that you know tone, you know response, you know even mode of communication.
That's right.
We've had that conversation before about, do you prefer a phone call, a text, an email, a hallway conversation? How would you best like me to communicate with you? If you don't take the time to ask some of those questions and really understand how a person is wired, you have a really hard time getting off on the right foot in the first place.
That's exactly right. And so, and again, this all comes back to asking questions. Don't just take off on an assumption, a judgment, and go down that road and sit and stew, as you say, right? If you've got an issue with something and you've made a judgment that you think is detrimental to the relationship or the situation, well, then ask a clarifying question. Otherwise we are going to be living with the consequences, and those consequences are generally not good.
Right. So as always, we welcome your feedback, your questions, your curious comments, all of those things. curiositynotjudgment.com. We love it when you post something there on the YouTube page. And again, just as a quick reminder, I use a platform that distributes this to a lot of the different audio sources. So many times I will not see a direct response. Like if you post a comment on Spotify, etc., that often doesn't get back to me. But the quickest way to make sure that you're going to connect with us is right through our website, which is curiositynotjudgment.com. Any final thoughts?
As we're going through life, less assumptions, more clarity.
That's a good one. It's a good mantra. All right, we'll see y'all next week. Have a great one.
Take care.